honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, what a weak, boring, soporific, pathetic performance that was.
Order. Those are my rights.
There he was, sort of meandering through his
Deputy Leader of
speech,
the Opposition has the floor.
reminding one of an athlete coming down the straight with spindly legs turning over but not getting any distance. And we're watching the clock, wondering whether he'll make it to the finish line by the time the clock runs out. And this was supposed to be from the man who's got the next election won. And what was his big point? His big point was that the Leader of the Opposition stands for nothing, but if we're wrong about that, he's a vicious ideologue. You know, the Leader of the Opposition's got no fiscal policy, but we've counted up his fiscal policy and we can put it out at $11 billion. You know, they've got a secret policy to drive wages down, but just in case we're wrong about that, there's going to be a wages explosion. You know, these are the lines, the tired old lines that he rattles out from a tired old Prime Minister. And what does he say? He said, oh, look, you're not like Newt Gingrich. That was his other one. Well, I remember you saying a few months ago that because the Pope wouldn't meet Newt Gingrich, the Pope was on your side in the next election. Was I wrong about that? You know, I've got the reserve in one pocket and the Treasury in the other and the Pope in the back pocket as well. You know, these are the monstrous delusions that you come out with. Monstrous delusions. And what it illustrates is that somebody that has been in power for so long has not only lost all grip on what's facing Australia and the problems that Australians are facing, but you've lost all grip of reality on yourself. On yourself. You know, and how does he finish it up? I said to my wife, we won it. We won it.
Prime Minister is shooting his seat. Order.
We won it.
Order.
Right.
The Deputy Leader has the floor.
Don't you worry about the McKerris pendulum. I said to my wife, we won it. And what did she say? What did she say? Bad luck, I was looking forward to the job in Europe. I think that's probably what she said. But, you know, here's the Prime Minister who began his big censure speech by saying, oh, I guess I'd better take it. I guess I better take it. It's a real effort for you, isn't it, to actually come in here and take a censure and debate anything? You could have had an opportunity to come in here and debate on Thursday of last week. You could have debated here on Monday, but you scuttled out like a rat out of the chamber. This is a Prime Minister alone of the 24 Prime Ministers that Australia has had, who refuses to come into the House every day and answer questions. Alone of all the 24 Prime Ministers that we've ever had in this country. This is a Prime Minister that has no respect for standards. This is a Prime Minister that describes the Senate as unrepresentative swill. This is a Prime Minister whose Prime Ministership was conceived in the deception of the Kirribilli conspiracy. This is a Prime Minister who has used the privilege of this House to smear reputations around Australia, and most recently to smear reputations of Royal Commissioners in Perth, underprivileged in this Parliament, to use expressions like cat's paw and hanging judge and lackey. This is a Prime Minister that is unable to discipline a minister who on every account cannot be trusted with the truth, as found on the sworn evidence of all of her former colleagues. This is a Prime Minister that presided over the Forest fiasco and had this Parliament House blockaded for days on end. And I've got to say, that was a pretty funny experience too, seeing the Zegna suit trying to walk through the blue siglets. People that he hadn't seen for a very long period of time, coming into work at 10:30 and 11 o'clock in the morning. The part-time Prime Minister who's presided over the A&L disaster. The A&L disaster, the shipping line that's going to be sold year after year and vetoed by the unions. This is a Prime Minister whose government's been enmeshed in the Civil Aviation Authority scandal. This is a government that was going to privatise the AIDC, and rather than selling off the remaining shares, it now wants to buy them back. Rather than getting money in, it's now paying money out in relation to the AIDC. This is a Prime Minister who enmeshed himself in the Coles-Myer board, who went out and attacked the superannuation funds of this country as donkeys and lemmings because he didn't like the... Quite proper, was it? Quite proper. OK, you are forcing people to put money under the management of donkeys and lemmings. Donkeys and lemmings. Quite right, quite proper.
Member for Northern Territory.
You know, you've got a system where you are taking 9% of employees' salaries from the employer and 3% from employees, and who do you want to pass it over to manage for 20 and 30 and 40 years? Donkeys and lemmings. Donkeys and lemmings. Quite right, he said. One of the genii of the Labor backbench. Quite right, he said. This is a government that's been protesting that it would do something about unfair dismissal laws and has done nothing. And he stands up and he says, oh, but look at me in APEC. I was some modern-day Metternich or Talleyrand. You know, Henry Keating. I was over there in Tokyo. It was all my work. The fact is the Prime Minister went off to APEC to lecture on the virtues of free trade at a time when you couldn't move anything in or out of Australia. What do you think our APEC neighbours thought of that? Free trade with Australia when you can get nothing across a wall. And the whole dispute was going to be solved by lunchtime. And here you had up at Weipa, as the Leader of the Opposition said, people who were working better for better pay. And this was a government that could not hold the line in relation to that got its orders, that couldn't solve the dispute. And in the ultimate humiliation, who is brought in to solve this? Not the Prime Minister, not the lorry over there, who's the responsible Minister for Industrial Relations. We've got to bring back, you guessed it, Bob Hawke. And you know, it was a very good illustration to the people of Australia why they brought Bob Hawke, because the truth is this Prime Minister is great at dividing, but he can never heal. He can never heal. He is the great divider of Australian society. He has divided it between the rich and the poor. He has divided it with his rhetoric, and he is now dividing the Labor Party in his desperate attempts to try and close down all dissent opinion. And Jim Snow was absolutely right about that, absolutely right. There used to be a strand of the Labor Party that represented blue-collar thought and represented blue-collar people, but there is no place in it in this modern Labor Party. The blue-collar's been replaced by the Zegna suit. And as a result, you see people like Campbell, who did once represent a strand of Labor Party thinking, being told there is no place for them and no place for their views. And the Deputy Prime Minister himself, of course, absolutely humiliated in relation to that. Had a conversation with Campbell assuring him he was going to be all right. Just before the phone call came, I've got to tell you, mate, your time's up. And if you want to take an example as to what the situation is in relation to ministerial standards, this is a government which has the lowest ministerial standards of any government in Australian history. This Prime Minister stood up in this House of Representatives on the 28th of August and he said, quote, I insist that in the performance of their public duties, in their dealings with the public and in the Parliament, ministers tell the truth and behave honestly at all times. That's what he said. I insist that in their dealings with the public and the Parliament, ministers tell the truth and behave honestly at all times. But the fact is he doesn't. The fact is he doesn't insist on his ministers being honest. The fact is you have a case study which proves it conclusively. You have a Royal Commission which has made very clear findings. You have seen a Royal Commission that gave the opportunity for every one of the former colleagues of the Minister for Health to come in. And you have seen the Royal Commissioner make his finding that in relation to the evidence that was before him, when Dr Lawrence denied she knew anything about the contents of the Eastern Petition on the morning of the 5th of November 1992, she did not tell the truth. Kovacs, Willoughby, M, Sullivan, Estelle Blackburn, Marcel Anderson, 7 Cabinet members and Kabolki support that the briefings took place. This is the finding. It means that 14 persons, all of whom supported Dr Lawrence's government and or worked for it, contradict her claimed non-involvement and unawareness. Only one of those 14 witnesses needs to be believed to confirm the truth of the contradiction. The chance that each of these 14 persons fabricated their evidence is so remote as to be non-existent. That was the finding. So remote as to be non-existent. And even in relation to that commission, the original argument, of course, was that it was all some kind of fit-out by the Liberal Party until it's... And it was it? So let's just remind who the Liberal Party conspirators were. Kovacs, Willoughby, M. Sullivan, Estelle Blackburn, Marcel Anderson, Kabelki, McGuinty, Ian Taylor. You know, we've been running both sides of politics in Western Australia. We, the Liberal Party, had a majority in the Lawrence cabinet, I suppose. And the fact was that the evidence that damned her, the evidence that came to light was Keith Wilson, a Labor minister, Pam Beggs, and when, of course, the Liberal conspiracy theory completely disappeared, we had a new theory. This time it was a Labor conspiracy, the Burke Squad. And we had the introduction of the Burke Squad as a reason why the Prime Minister could walk away from that assurance that he was going to insist on his ministers telling the truth. And, of course, the Burke Squad thesis would have you believe all of these people were somehow being manipulated out of prison by Brian Burke. They all went in and they gave fabricated evidence. But the truth is, as the Commissioner found, this minister could not tell the truth to the West Australian Parliament. She could not tell the truth to the National Press Club. She could not tell the truth when she was asked about it in this Parliament. She could not tell the truth to the Parliamentary Press Gallery. And any Prime Minister worth his salt, any Prime Minister with any decency and respect for standards in Australia would have taken the action which any previous Prime Minister would have done and would have dismissed her. But this is, in fact, a weak Prime Minister. A weak Prime Minister who is prepared to pull down the standards rather than enforce them. Whitlam had the guts to sack Connor, but this Prime Minister has never had the courage to deal with or discipline one minister. And it's that failure which is eating the heart out of standards in Australian public life. Eating the heart out because we now know there are no standards. Any minister on that front bench of the Labor government knows that they can mislead the public, they can deceive, they can do it at the press club, they can do it at the House, and there will be no discipline whatsoever from the Prime Minister. This Prime Minister has effectively given a green light to all of his ministers in relation to their dealings with the public. And the awful truth is that this Prime Minister cannot discipline dishonesty without demanding his own commission. Because if this Prime Minister now started to insist, that ministers deal honestly, where would that leave him? Where would that leave him? Where would that leave him in relation to the legislated income tax, the cuts, the LAW, the tax cuts which are due to take effect on 1 January, in 4 weeks' time, on 1 January. The people of Australia who had legislated for them a $10 per week tax cut from 1 January and will not receive $1 for 1 day in relation to those tax cuts. And not only was it the income tax LAW that turned to an LIE, it was all of the other taxes as well. It was the 2% increase in the wholesale sales tax, the wine tax, the company tax, all of those other taxes which show that the platform that you were given this 3-year term was essentially fraudulent. A platform which you did not have any intention of introducing, which you have not introduced, and which, if you have your way, you will try and do again in relation to the next 3-year term. The fact is that this is a government that has presided over a massive increase in foreign debt, an 800% increase in foreign debt over the last 13 years. It is a government that has put Australia into recurring crises on its current account. It is a government which now is facing rising unemployment. And when you hear them talk about this wonderful period of economic growth, a wonderful period of economic growth which had as its high point a low of 8.2% unemployment, and over the last 4 months, 8.2, 8.3